Welcome to another edition of the Sim Racing Garage. I'm Barry Rowland, and in this episode, we're going to be reviewing the USB conversion kit from Sim Racing Machines for the Fanatec Mclaren GT3 wheel. Now, I've been wanting to get this kit for a while now, so obviously I can run this wheel on my direct drive wheel systems. And now that I have it in hand, it's time to put it through the SRG review process. So let's get to it. Now for our closer look segment of this video. Not a whole lot to see here because it's just an adapter system, but it is a very nicely done one. This has a nice aluminum connector here, or adapter plate if you will. It has a 50.8 millimeter inside hole pattern and a 70 millimeter outside hole pattern. And behind that we've got a B&G Racing 1-inch spacer. Very nice, all high quality parts. As you can see, B&G is not a cheap spacer. And then behind that we've got a piece of carbon fiber. You can see the layers of it there. That's the carbon fiber. So it gives us a nice carbon fiber look on our wheel when it's attached there. And then we have a thicker piece of Durlin back here that will be attaching everything together with these 3 screws, the flathead screws going into some nice counterboard holes there. And here we see the actual Molex plug and wires that we're going to be using to plug this into the PCB board once we get to that point. Right. On the other side, we can see the teensy board and a nice screw down type block up here. So it gives us a nice secure connection point for our USB cable. I like these screw down blocks because they're actually stronger, I think, than solder, because I can usually pull a solder piece off or break the wire at the solder or whatever. But yeah, pulling something out of one of these blocks that are properly tightened down is kind of difficult, which adds to the strength of the pressure pulling on this wire. And besides that, in this adapter, there's a hole with has been tapped, and he's run a bolt in there and you can see this clamp that he's got cinching down on the cable itself. It's kind of a cable gable situation, if you will. So yeah, nice and tight. I've pulled on this before and I can't get anything to budge. So I don't think that's going to be a problem as far as normal use anyway, as far as turning the wheel back and forth all the time and bending the cable back and forth and putting some pressure on it. So this teensy board has already been programmed with the firmware that they're going to use on this wheel that gives us functions of all the buttons. The OLED actually works. Get this a little closer. So we'll have a workable OLED here. All of our buttons are going to work. There is an issue with these white rotaries because of the way they're made by Fanatec. I believe it's an issue of they're always, when you turn them, it's always got a connection closed on this, or in other words, it's pushing down all the time on the button if you had a button in there, is a good analogy. This still works, the A, B, C, D selection for our clutches. So we can still do our bite points on our clutches, which is very cool. And that's for A and B, and there's 2 different ways to do it, but we'll look at that in a little bit. And also, we also have C and D, which actually is just you can assign the analog axis of the clutch paddles back here to whatever you want. Braking, throttle, things like that. So very cool that the firmware they developed for this. So you got to have that on there, obviously, if you're going to be able to use this wheel in the USB scenario on a PC. Right. Anything else we want to talk about here? I think that's about it. The cable, a nice 5 mil piece, 5 mil thick, a very industrial type of coil cable here. I really like these cables. And yeah, it's the usual standard high quality stuff that you're going to get from Sim Racing Machine. And I have a Lumberg 5-pin DIN plug on mine, a little screw-on plug that I use on all my wheels, but you can also obviously order it with just the standard USB-A type connector on it, so you can just plug into regular USB. But I like to plug mine on a fixed hard mounting point I have on my chassis or my rig. Right, so yeah, not a lot else to see here. I am going to, with you to get a bag of bolts here, and these are M5 0.8 pitch, looks like stainless steel units. Very nice. You get 6 of those, so you can attach your adapter to these holes. And I'm going to be using a Q1R adapter, and this one happens to be the 50.8 millimeter. It's kind of smallish on the back part of this. So I'm going to be attaching it to these holes here. Right. So it'll go on like that. And I just happen to have one of these laying around, so I'm going to use that because I haven't been using it. It'll also take, obviously, a 70mm adapter. So just about anything out there as far as your adapter or your connection. Or if you want to, you can connect it directly to whatever wheel that you're using, as long as it has an adapter for the shaft. Right. Anything else? I think that's it. So what we'll do next is get straight to it. Let's go ahead and start pulling this wheel apart. And then once we have it apart, then we'll do the installation of the kit. And then I'll do a reassembly of the wheel, because some guys want to see me reassembling it instead of just leaving it open, and even though it's really just the reverse of actually of the disassembly. But anyway, we'll get to that when we get there, but next we're going to be pulling this wheel apart. So now we'll go ahead and take this wheel apart so we can install our adapter. Right, so first thing I'm going to do is pull these knobs off, these rotary knobs, and the little switches here before we go and start getting screws. But even before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and pull this quick release adapter off. And I'll go ahead and do that right now. Now you're going to need some tools here in case you guys want to do this, or are going to do this. You're going to need a 13mm socket. That's what I use anyway, but something 13mm. A wrench. You can probably get away with a wrench if you're real careful. But I like using these deep sockets. Even a regular socket may work, just so I can get down on top of these shafts that are on those rotary buttons. And we have a 4mm socket tool we're going to be using for a hex 4mm and a hex 3mm. And we're going to need this Torx bit. And this is a T10. And that's for getting all the little screws on the front off. Then we're going to need an assortment of, I'm not sure which one I'm going to use yet, but these are just Phillips screws, or rather drivers, that I'm going to use in my handy little DeWalt driver here. Right, and I use this for pulling the knobs off, just so I don't mar anything up when I'm trying to get a knob off. Right, but first, let's go ahead and pull off the bolts on the back here that are holding this quick release on. So we'll do that. And I'm going to speed a lot of this up when I get into the repetitious part of things, so you guys don't have to watch me do it in real time. Right, so now this thing should come right off, and it does. And you can see it's just a, well, it's just a plastic quick release. Kind of a flimsy looking thing, but it actually gets the job done. So yeah, I guess I can't knock it too much. But yeah, it's just all plastic, and it does have flex in it. But anyway, we're not going to worry about this anymore after our conversion, are we? Right. So now we have the back off. We can go ahead, and I'm going to do this. Go ahead. We're going to need to take these 4 bolts out of this, because eventually this is going to slide out this way with the plug on the other end once we release it from the PCB board that's internal to here. So we might as well, while we're on the back, go ahead and hit that. And that just means I need to change from my 4mm to my 3mm. And there's only 4 of them. And you can see that these are some rather long machine screws that go in there. So it's going down deep in here, so the threaded pieces must be down in there. But you can see once I've taken these loose, you have a little washer here that comes off. So we'll keep that put to the side, and now this plug is actually loose. We're not going to pull on it though, because I don't want to cause any stress to any wires, but yeah, it is loose, and it will pop off this way. And eventually we're going to pull it out that way. Right, so now what I have to do is go to work on the front. And I'm going to do, first I'm going to actually go ahead and take these rotaries off, and then we'll get to the switches. And again, I'm using this little non-marring piece here that you use for taking door panels off of cars and things like that. And it just makes it a little easier instead of having to get your fingernail in there, even though these are pretty easy to get off. At least the last time that I got them off, they were. So we just kind of pry them off. There we go. So this is what the knob looks like, and it's got a little key in there. You can see the flat spot that will go onto the corresponding flat spot on our switch there. Right. So, and you can also, we can see our 13mm 8mm nut now that we have the cover off. So let's get the other covers off. And let's put them over here so we don't lose them. We're going to need to reuse those. All right. There we go. So now we got those 3 off, and I'm going to go ahead and pull off these rockers, the switches. And to do that, they had this little rubber boot on them. And what you can do is usually get your push down on the rocker like this, and then kind of roll your finger in and grab that rubber with your fingernail like that. See if you guys can see that. I'll try it again. See, I'm pushing down and just kind of rolling out with my fingernail. It grabs the rubber boot, and then you can just pull it right off. One rubber boot. Right. And of course, that's revealing the 8mm nut for that switch. Right. So let's go ahead and do the same thing to the other one. Peel it out of there. It might take you a couple of tries to get that, but usually it comes on out like that. Good. All right, so let's go ahead and take our 13mm deep sock and just put it on the nut and just loosen it up. Pretty easy. It should be easy to do by hand because this is all plastic and it shouldn't have been tightened up too much at the factory when they assemble it, because you really don't want to over torque it, so you're just going to snap that plastic cover there. All right, so the nut comes off, and there's a couple of things behind it. There's that flat little nut there. And there's going to be a couple of things behind it, a washer, or maybe just one thing. Yeah, okay, just one. Sometimes there's 2. That's like the little lock washer. So we'll keep those guys together. And we'll just do the same thing for the other guys. All right, so there we have all of it off, and we have them stacked over here so we don't lose them, hopefully. And now we'll just go ahead and take our 8mm deep socket and do the same thing for these guys over here. I think these are the ones that have more than just the lock washer behind it, because I remember taking this apart one time when I really got the wheel for a review. So let's see what's in here. Yeah, there we go. This one's a little different. It still has that little flat nut and the little tooth lock washer deal going on, right? But it's also got this little guide washer. See the little tabs on this? So it's actually got a groove in this switch here. And you just want to pay attention to this when you're taking it apart. So when you put it back together, it'll go on there with no problem. And it's got another notch on the other side. See a little notch in the plastic itself? Hope you guys can see that okay. So there's a notch in the actual plastic that the other tab falls down into. All right, let's keep us all this together, get the other one off, and we are getting close. So it's really not that hard to take this wheel apart, which is a good thing. You can all do it with your hand. You can do it with your hand. Here again, there's all 3 of those pieces. So keep those over there. So now that we've got this part of this top plate loose, now we can go ahead and get all of these screws out. We got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 total, right? So we're going to need our, again, number 10 Torx bit for this. And we'll go ahead and change this out and get to work. All right, so this is what the screws looks like. Again, a Torx 10 or a T10, and it's got the aggressive threads for the plastics and stuff. Right. So now that we've got all that off, we should be able to get the cover off. And what I usually do is try to just kind of lift off on different points. Oh, one more thing. I felt it was a little bit giving me a little bit of trouble there, but yeah, see this thing here? This is that key that lets us, in fact, it just almost popped right off on my, and went everywhere. This, if you have it in the back, is going to make this stick down here because it goes all the way through and actually connects it. So yeah, you want to make sure you have that out. Right, now it should pop right off, and be mindful this part, rather the pass or pit or neutral buttons. Those are the two buttons you have to watch out for falling back into the actual casing here. These will not fall back because they've got the caps on them. If we had pulled the caps off of these buttons here, then they would fall through too. So it's good to just leave that. So usually what I'll do is just kind of tilt it this way when I'm taking it off. And there we go. Should just come right off like that. Couldn't be easier, right? And what I meant is, you'll see when I turn this the other way, let's go ahead and take the P out. This thing is just going to fall right out of my hand. Well, of course now it won't. There it goes. So it'll fall back into the wheel itself. So now we have to worry about that. Again, kind of a thin piece of plastic here, not much really to see here, kind of flexy, but this doesn't bear any of the force from your wheel when you're actually using it. It's just a beauty plate, if you will. Right, with the buttons, of course. So we'll get this out of the way, keep our buttons straight so we don't lose them. And here we have the inside of the wheel. Now, you're going to have to pull, unfortunately, but not that it's not that bad of a deal, obviously, but we're going to have to take, and you can see this PCB board out here. Looks like we have a screw here, little pointer, got one here, it's got yellow on it, so they can tell that I've taken this off. When I break that yellow bead there, and I try to send it back for warranty, they're going to go, sorry Barry, you were in there mucking around in the wheel, so we're not going to warranty it for you. And we've also got it here. So it looks like we have 1, 2, 3 of those screws on each side, so that's 6. And we've also got 2 screws here for this OLED. See these little screws there? Little teeny Phillips right there. So they have to be removed for the whole thing to come off. At least that's what I've been told, and we'll see how it works. First thing, we'll go ahead and get the other 6. I'm going to try to leave all the wires connected except for this one down here. And before I take it apart, I'm going to go ahead and pull this Molex plug off while everything is nice and secured inside the wheel still as far as the board is concerned. That way, if I had it loose and tried to pull it off, then it'd be shaking around, and yeah, it just wouldn't be as easy. So I'm just going to kind of get my fingers around the bottom of this and just kind of rock it from side to side and see if I can get it just to come loose. It looks like there's a little coating on here. I can see a reflection. I don't know if you guys can see that in the video or not. It's a shiny reflection on the, and that's usually some kind of a glue or maybe even a coating for waterproofing or something, or water resistance coating. So you got to be careful. You don't want to destroy your board when you're pulling this plug off. So this is actually the nervous part when you're trying to get this off. So there we go. I just keep rocking it back and forth. And I got one side to come up. There's the other side. So yeah, now we're in business. There it goes. So now we have it off. And we've also revealed another Phillips screw under there. So that one's going to have to come out, obviously, also. But I think I'm going to be able to leave these plugs plugged in and just kind of fold it back. So we'll see how that goes in a minute. For now, we'll go ahead and change out our bits here to get those out. I'm going to use a kind of a large, if I don't lose all my Phillipses there. I'm going to use kind of a large bit here for these because they're kind of big. So let's see how it goes. First, I'll go ahead and get this bottom one down here. All right, so a little closer look at those Phillips screws. And again, just the aggressive plastic thread there. Right. Now, when I took these out, this yellow stuff came out, which just makes things messy. I'm glad that came out because you'll need to be mindful of that too. These little silicone button covers, you want to be mindful you don't lose these guys because they will come off. This one actually just slid off of this button over here. You can see this one. And you can see a cover here, there's one here, there's one there, and of course on the other side there's covers also. Not a big deal, you just want to be paying attention to what's going on here so you don't lose them. And because this one just fell off, I think I'm just going to set it aside because usually that means it's loose and it's going to keep falling off when I pull this board off. Now, I still have one more screw to go here, over here. And that's all of them, I believe. That's what it looks like. Now, I also still have the two screws that are holding this OLED in. And I'm going to have to switch bits for that one to a smaller Phillips. This is actually a number, does it tell me what it is? PHO size, whatever that means. Right, so I'm actually going to put that in there, make sure it's a decent fit. It seems to be, because I don't want to strip this out. That's the last thing you want to do. And let's go ahead and see if we can get them out. All right, there's one. Very careful. There we go. And you can see how small this is. It's just a little teeny thing. I can get some focus on it. Not very long at all. All right, so now we got those two out. So that means that this should be able to come off of here without too much trouble. And it does. Okay, yeah, see? That is actually a plug. I could probably leave that on. You can see how this just plugs into. It gives us a good look at the LED. Well, we're in here mucking around, eh? So actually I'm just going to leave that off, put it over here on my anti-static pad. And now I'm seeing what else I might have to do to get this loose. And it doesn't seem like anything. See how it's coming loose now? So I'm going to kind of just take this forward, pull it forward. And I'm trying to make sure I don't have any tension on anything here as I'm pulling it off. Like this. Let's get this out of the way. And just kind of lay it over here. Now there's a spring on here that you want to make sure you don't lose. You see that? It's got that little spring sitting up there. Make sure you don't lose that. It does serve a purpose. I forget what it's for. I know what it's for, but I forgot, so I can't tell you right away. But just make sure that that spring stays on there and doesn't come off. Or if it does come off, just put it back on. Right. Okay, so now we've got this folded out of our way, very gently. And again, I'm doing all this on an anti-static pad here, so I want to make sure there's no electrical discharges that screw up my whole board. Right, so now we've got this guy loose. So what we'll do now is go to the actual installation of the conversion kit on the next segment of the video. Alright, so now we can do the installation of our adapter and our conversion kit. And first off, before I do that, this spring that I was talking about before in the segment before where we were actually taking this apart, this spring is actually for, it rests up against a button back here, a little plastic piece that sits down in a hole. And if I can get that out of there, there we go. This little button here, as you can see, it's hollow and it's got kind of an indentation on the other side. And what that's for is, first off, it fits on top of that spring. And when we put this plastic quick release on, right there, it has a little pole in the back of it. Let's see if we can get a good look at it here. See that? And it goes in and presses against this button, which compresses the spring, which lets this PCB board know that we're using the plastic quick release. I'm not sure why Fanatec has done that. I don't know. But if you get the other quick release, the metal one, the $100 one that upgrades from this plastic cheapy thing, it doesn't have that on it. At least as far as all the pictures I've seen of it on the internet, it just doesn't have that on it. So for some reason, Fanatec wants to know if the plastic one is on there, and I'm not sure why that is. But anyway, just so you know what that spring is for. And I would just keep that button back in that hole and just leave it the way it was when I took it out, and just keep the spring in there and just put it all back together, even though you don't need it. You could take it all out. Right, back to the actual installation. All right, so here's our cable with our Molex plug. On the other side, obviously, and you gotta be careful when you're moving this around. And it actually will fall out because remember we took the bolts out of this part. So that'll actually fall out to a certain extent anyway. Then we have to manually pull it out. So I use a little process here where I'll actually bend this cable, this ribbon cable, actually kind of bend it, round it, make it roundy, so it's easier to get it out the back. So let's see if that's gonna actually work here. So I'm gonna be very careful not to mess that board up. So here it comes out the back, and because I bend it like that, it'll come out easier. But then we have the actual plug that's got to come through with this ribbon cable. So there is a little bit of fiddliness going on here, but I think we can get it done if I can get, I just got to find out where that plug is. There we go. So see how I kind of bent the plug sideways there? To kind of roll it a little bit, it's just so it'll come out. And it's like that. So I just kind of rolled it over like that. Okay, got it out successfully. And that's what it looks like, and wow, it actually looks like I have a, if you can see that, a bent plug right here. This guy right here. Yeah, how about that? I didn't even know that. But it worked fine, the wheel did. So I don't know how that happened, but anyway. Easy enough to straighten out though. You can straighten that out real easy. So now we have this out, all we got to be concerned with now is getting our hub assembly on. And of course I've got to get this cable through there and mount the holes, or mount it so the holes are lining up. Easy enough. Really this is the easy part. And again, I'm going to kind of roll this, twist it a little bit so it'll kind of go in with the cable. Of course, this cable's a little bit easier to get in, obviously, because it's not as wide as the other ribbon cable. Then I'll just reach in on the other side and guide it through as I slowly put this over the hub. There we go. Fits in rather nicely. And of course, you can see the cable sticking up there. Nice and long cable too, so we got plenty of length there, which is a good thing. Right. So now what I want to do is I'm going to take some of these bolts and just kind of attach it, not real hard or anything, or tighten everything down, but I just want to get this hub here so it's not bending around on me or shaking around or anything like that. So I'll just kind of get some of these guys started here, and one more here, just so it'll hang there and not fall off on me while I'm going in and doing the electrical connection. Just a way I like to do things. There's, like I said, there's probably 10 different ways to do this, but I like to do that because I've had things fall off before, and so many times when I do these kind of things, see, just screw that in with my fingers just enough to keep it from wanting to fall back and out. So that should do it. Now we'll turn it back around, and there we have the plug. All right. So while you were doing this, you may have, by tilting this thing around or whatever, you may have lost one of these guys, the shifter actuators over here. This guy right here. See this? It may have fallen out. So if that falls out on you, you know what that is. It goes back in behind the shifter, and it's keyed, so you got to twist it and make it fall all the way in. And of course, they actually bump up against these switches here to provide the shift. Little springy things. Okay, so now I'm going to tuck this underneath like so, and then I'm going to flip my board back up just like this. I'm going to grab it by one of these rotary switch things because that's a good handle to use to get a good purchase on it. And I'm just going to lay it back in there like that. Okay, now we got to consider, oh, before I do that, I'm just one quick thing I want to show you here. Now I'm going to be running this on obviously a direct drive force feedback wheel, and you can see the spaces in here between where these inserts are for the threads. The whole thing is, how strong is this going to be on like a 54G Cole Morgan turned all the way up, which I will be running that way because I want to test the strength of this. But if it was kind of weak, I was looking at it and thinking maybe you could actually take, and I'm not sure how much this would help, but in these little spots here where there's recesses in here, you could actually fill this in with 2-part epoxy that will harden and solidify, which may make it a little less prone to cracking, but I might not need to do that anyway. But it's just something I thought I would share with you while I was looking at it, because I'm always looking, when I'm looking at stuff, I'm always thinking, man, how could we reinforce this? And I think that might be a decent way to do it. But we're going to test it first before I take everything back apart and put epoxy in it. And maybe I won't need to. So again, let me put this back on. Again, pretty easy here. It's just got to take your time with this kind of stuff. You got to tuck these ribbon cables, make sure they're back behind these little breakout boards where the plugs are. Make sure everything's back where it needs to be. And before I actually plug this in, well, actually on this one I could probably go ahead and plug it in because I got room to move things. So I'm going to go ahead and put the plug back on, just see how it's going to fit before I start screwing everything back down. And let's see. I'm going to hit it backwards, obviously. So it goes in this way. All right, so we're just going to plug it on. And I'm not going to use hot glue or anything like that. You could, I guess, to to maybe make it more secure. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. But I'm just going to leave it like that because this Molex plug went in very securely when I just pushed it in. If it was loose or something like that, then I might just throw a dab of hot glue on it just to make sure it doesn't come out. But I don't think that's going to be a problem. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of pre-bend these wires a little bit, keeping them all straight with my finger. Just kind of bend them down a little bit so that when I put the cover back on, they're not hitting the cover, or the cover doesn't pinch them when it goes down. That's the last thing you want on something like this. Okay, so now we're ready to go back and start putting all of our regular screws back in. These ones that are actually holding the main board. It really doesn't matter the order you do this in. I can put those in, or I could go ahead. Remember our little OLED here, our little board? I could actually just plug, I'm going to plug that back in anyway while I have it in my hand. And I'll use my thumb here just to kind of push that plug part back on. And that looks good. And while I have, actually I'm going to change my mind here because I already got this little small tipped one in here. I'm going to go ahead and put, remember those very small screws that were holding this in. So I'm going to go ahead and put those in. And I'm going to loosen up my clutch here because I want to put them in and strip them. Pretty simple. Again, you can do this with a screwdriver. You don't need a driver like I have. And that's why we use a magnetic dish over here, because I got a lot of screws out of this thing right now, and it's nice to know that they're not going to fly around on me and I'll lose them somewhere. All right, so we get this guy back in. Okay. All right, nice and tight. And I'll probably just take this out, just check and make sure everything feels good. And it does. Right, so now I can switch over to my bigger bit and start running these guys back in, the ones that are holding the main PCB back on, and I'll go ahead and do that and speed it up. Okay, we've got all 6 of the big screws in. We've got 2 of the smaller ones in for the OLED, and that should do it. Now, remember these little silicone things? Obviously, I've got a little pile of them over here when they all fell off. Simple enough, you just put those right back on. No worries. Just like that. All right. And once we have all these on, then we'll be ready to go ahead and put this back together on the plate. I believe that's it. Everything looks good. Again, just checking my plug there again. And sometimes I'll take the adapter out just to make sure all these went in tight enough. And if I can't turn it with my fingers too much, then I know it's tight enough. Because you hate to have something come loose after you've been in here. You just want to make sure. Take your time. Yeah, there's no sense in rushing this. Right. Okay, it all looks good now. So, all we have to do now is put our cover back on, it looks like. And I will go ahead and slip this back on. Well, before we do that, obviously, don't forget your pit and your neutral switches. And this is a time you can change them around if you want to, in case you want to change the orientation. I'll just leave it where they were. All right. And these have these little fins on them. I'll show this real quick. See that little fin? So they're actually keyed to fit in one direction, upside down or the other way, so that they will stay on there. Now again, when I put this back on, because these things fall out so easily, I'm just going to kind of grab the whole thing here, even though I've got a couple bolts on the back, so I'm not worried about that coming off. Gently put it back on, like so. There we go. I tell you, I don't think you can get it any easier than this. Now we'll go ahead and put this back on, which is our 10 of our, get my little bit here, 10 of our T10 Torx screws. So we'll go ahead and put this in the driver and get that done. Okay, now that we got all the screws in, everything's pretty tight already, and now we'll just go ahead and start putting all of our washers back on our rotaries and our switches. I'll do the switches first, kind of the same way I took them off. And one thing to be mindful of on this washer here, it has a groove on the inside, obviously, and a little tab. So you get a good look at that. See a little tab there? And that tab is going to fit into one of these grooves here. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see that, but there's one here and there's one on the top. So it depends on which way this groove is going to catch the inside of this washer. So you have to be careful when you're doing this. So you don't have to do it 2 times, just do it once. This one has the groove on the top of this switch, so I'm going to use the tab towards that top hole, and this little inside tab will follow that groove. At least that's the plan. It can be a little fiddly getting them straightened up. That's why I have this thing. My pointer works as a tool for many things. Just got to get it in there. There it goes. And it fell right in. So now we're good to go. Easy enough. All we got to do is put a little washer back on and then put our nut back on. Now the problem with this nut is it's way kind of recessed. It's hard to get your finger on there. So what I'll do is kind of lay it flat and then try to get it started very gently with my little tool here, like that, and it started. Then I can go ahead and take my 8 socket and tighten it up. And there we have it. So I'm going to do the other one the same way. Again, starting with the washer with the tab on it. And this one has the groove on the bottom of the switch. So I'll have to turn it this way to get it to go on right. Can be a little fiddly, but just have a little patience with it and it will go on like that. That went in pretty good, actually. Sometimes you get lucky. That's all there is to it. All right, so we get that one on. Let me turn it this way so it'll kind of drop on there. There we go. And the same thing with the nut that we did on the last one. Just got to kind of, see if I can get I don't know if I can show you how I'm doing this, but I'm just kind of, without putting too much angle on it, I'm just kind of twisting that, try to get it to go on. There it goes. Secure it down, and we're done. All right, so now I'm going to speed up the 3 other rotaries because they're actually even more simple, because remember they just have a lock ring and a nut. So we'll speed that application up. All right, so now we got them on. It's just a simple matter of putting our knobs back on. Remember, we have 2 whites and 1 blue. The blue one goes on the bottom there, and they're all keyed. You see the flat spot there? That will go on the corresponding flat spot on the rotary. Again, pretty simple stuff. Even I can do it. All right, one more. See, that was pretty easy. Now these rubber grommets that we took off, I don't know if you guys saw that part of it, but easy to put back on. You just got to kind of work with a little bit with 2 fingers at once and kind of slide it past that red knob and just keep pushing it through. And again, I can use my little tool here to help push that down. And it goes on pretty good. Just like that. 2 boots on, and man, we are almost done. So this is really, even though it might look a little involved, it's really not that hard. It just takes a little time to get it done, that's all. And once it's done, it's done. And you're ready to rock. All right, so one thing left, right? Remember, we only had 3 bolts in the back of here. All right? And this is actually, I'm going to go ahead and get the other 3 started. Before I actually attempt to tighten them all up. And these are 4 mil as far as the hex wrench you need for them. Remember, the only thing we needed the 3 mil for was the actual. Now, just as I'm thinking about it, you could actually reorientate this part of it by moving it around on the spacer if you wanted to change the direction of where this cord is. But I'm going to leave it that way because it's going to kind of go like this and then over my steering column extension and then over to where I'm going to plug it into my rig. So I'm going to leave it right where it is. That'll work fine. If it was this way, it would still work because it would be canted over on this side. In fact, you know what? I tell you, I haven't even made my mind up about this yet, but I might change that. These are going to be left over. These are the 4 3mm hex screws that we're holding this gallon, right? That we're going through those holes like that. But that's going to be extra parts. I'm going to put all this in a bag. I'm putting it over here. All that stuff is going to go in a bag so I can take this back to stock. Right, so all I'm going to do now is tighten these 4 pieces right here down, and really I'm good to go after that. There's no issue after that. So yeah, we'll just go ahead and end the reassembly at this point here. And the next what we're going to do is take a look at the finished product and see how it handles. All right, so we've got everything put together now. Everything's tightened down. You can see I have my Q1R quick release on here now. And you'll notice that the carbon plate that they put on there that we saw before I actually put it on really blends in well with the rest of the back of the wheel. You know, and it's little details like this that really shines when you're talking about sim racing machines. Yeah, they do a good job with the details like this. Really looks like it was made to be on there, actually, I think. And again, I have my little 50.8 bolt pattern quick release on there, only using 3 bolts for that. That'll hold just fine, I'm sure. And if you notice, I actually changed the orientation of this wire. Now it's coming off towards the left side. So now when I do the over the wheel thing, it kind of goes in the right direction instead of being hanging out over here and then coming back against it. At least that's the way I thought it might work a little better that way. And all I had to do was take the 3 bolts that you saw on the other side of this, on this side, and loosen them up, take them off actually, and then just spin this around to the other side and then bolt it back up. Everything bolt right back up, so everything looks good. Yeah, no problems there. So, and I like the orientation there better for my purposes anyway. And it's good to know that we can actually configure this a little bit differently than what the manufacturer sent it out of the shop. Or you could probably actually, but when you ordered one, ask them to turn it in whatever orientation you want it to. That's probably what I could have done if I was thinking that far ahead, but I wasn't. Right, so everything's done. So yeah, it's looking good. What we're going to do next is go ahead and just hook this up to a Windows computer and get into the game controller settings and just see if, well, it works. Before we go to all the trouble of bolting it up and trying to drive with it, it's always good to give it a test run in case something's wrong, and then we can go back in before we go to all that trouble. So yeah, we'll do that next. All right, so now we're going to plug the wheel in and see what this looks like with the firmware that's running on this Teensy board for our conversion assembly. And yeah, you can see right here the game controllers. It shows up as a Fanatec Club Sport wheelbase still. I'm a little surprised by that, but I guess that's the way they wrote the firmware, to label it that way. Go down to properties and open up the wheelbase properties, and there it is. And now we'll just go ahead and start with the shifters. So get over here and we'll do the, I think this is the right shifter. You can see our buttons lighten up. And we'll go ahead and do the left one. So you can see the shifter buttons are working fine. And we'll do the clutches. Do the left one over here. And you can see X rotation. And then we'll do the other one. So you see they're on the same rotation, which is the way it should operate. So that's good. Everything's looking good there. Flip the wheel around. And let's see. Let's try out the funky switch. Looks like the directionals are working. The dial, let's see, yep, dial's working. 17 and 18 are on the dial. Should have a push button on it too. Yeah, there it is. That's 12, so that's working. All right, so let's try the other buttons. Xbox, that's working. So it looks like all the buttons are going to work for us. I'm just going to go around and punch them all. Yep, that's good, that's good. All right, now everything's working as far as the buttons, it looks like. Let's try the switch, and I don't see anything on the switch. But if you read the directions on the website on the installation, it says that we might have some inputs that aren't seen on the Windows game controller or the game controller properties windows, and neither one of these are working, it looks like. But when you go to your game, it will work. So we'll see that once we get into our different games. Now also to note here is this right hand rotary doesn't work at all. I'm not getting anything. Now that might change once we get into a game, but the left hand one does work, and you can see 24 is lit up. If I move this, it goes to 25, 26, 27, 28, which means this particular rotary, the way these things work is they're always on. So instead of just clicking as it goes past and hitting a button like a lot of rotaries work, this one is always on. But if you'll notice, I'm going to go over here, and this is the tuning button on the steering wheel, and I'm going to press that in, and you'll notice that 28 goes out. So that interrupts that press. It's always closed, now it's open. And the instructions for the conversion here say that if you're in a game, you can actually hold that down and program a button to what that is, and then let go, and it should work. And then of course you can do that for however many clicks we have. So it goes to, yeah, goes to 32. So let's see how far it goes the other way. 21. So 21 to 32 it looks like on this particular driver. So yeah, I guess that'll work. So everything's working. That's what we want to see. And what we'll do next, obviously, is go ahead and drive this in some games and see how it does. So this is how the wheel is set up on my rig. And you can see with this USB conversion kit, because of the spacer and the hubs and the adapter and everything, and my Q1R quick release, it's about 4 inches there extra than I would normally be running, or somewhere near that. But fortunately I have a different set of spacers, so I had to take my 4-inch spacer out and go ahead and bolt in my 2-inch spacer, which is good to have, like I said, a couple of spacers laying around so I can change things around to make it easier to use things. Right, and of course we're going to have this bolted up to the Cole Morgan 54G servo motor that is in my Leo Bodner Sim Steering 2 kit. I've already been running it a bit, and I'm running the motor at 100% in the driver for the Sim Steering 2 driver, and I'm adjusting it to what I can tolerate in game when I'm running it in the game. And I'm trying to run it as high as I can, and I've been running it already, and I will continue to run it. I'm trying to put about 13, 14 hours on this thing total, with me cranking on it pretty heavy in the most extreme environments I can put it in, which would be Sebring, and the Lotus 79 is the toughest one. But I did run the Porsche RSR also a little bit in it, just to see what the differences were. So anyway, we'll get to the driving segment now and talk about what we accomplished. So here we are in iRacing in the Lotus 79 with the Sebring track. And yeah, this is again probably the toughest track on a steering wheel and hardware in general, especially when you have it cranked up. The first thing I'm going to test here is the functions of the wheel, and I've already dialed this in, the clutch bite point on it, and see if it's actually working still. Then I got out and I came back in, see if I had to reset it or not. So I'm going to try it again, and there you go. I did still get a little wheel spin there, as you saw, but I can adjust it a little bit more. And think about adjusting the clutch here. You put it on the B, letter B, on the blue knob, and then what you'll do is you'll hold in the, this is how I did it anyway. You hold in the left pedal, leave the right pedal out, and then put it in first gear, rev it up, and then go ahead and start turning the dial counterclockwise until the car starts moving, and then you can play with it from there, because then you know that's the initial bite point of the clutch, and just tweak it to your own desire, of course, from that point. Unfortunately, we don't have a number up on the window when we're doing that. It's just a blank window, but you can, by feel, pretty easy. It's easily enough, rather, set it up the way you want it to. Right. The buttons all work like they're supposed to, with the caveat to the dials, the white dials. The one on the right does not work. The one on the left does work, but as you saw, if you saw the configuration segment of this video in the Windows game controller settings, that these dials are constant on. So when you have to go over and press the menu button, and that lifts or breaks that connection. So then we can actually program a button and then let go of the mode button or the menu button, and then it will map to whatever button or whatever function rather that we chose. But the funny thing is about this is that it's just like mapping one button, and you can map every single one of the positions on that white dial to a different button. But it's kind of funky because you have to click backwards and forwards to make it work one increment. So it's not like it's just a spin the dial and it works like a regular rotor. It just doesn't work that way. And that's just the way it is because of the way these rotaries are set up on here as being constant on switches. So beyond that though, everything else works just great. No problems with anything. It's running great. And yeah, and again, I'm not real surprised. Sim Racing Machines does a great job with this stuff, and in the firmware, I forget the name of the person who did the firmware for this, but he did a great job too. Right. So let's talk about the durability of the wheel, because that's another big concern of this particular wheel, especially now that I'm running it on my Leo Bodner Sim Steering 2 system that's sporting the 54G Cole Morgan motor, which has a hold torque of 13 Newton meters and a peak of 26. And I've got the driver for the Sim Steering 2 set up to be 100%, so the motor's running at 100% power, and then I adjust it to what I can tolerate in iRacing, and I'm driving it at a much higher torque level than I would normally drive it if I was just doing a race. So yeah, I'm trying to thrash this wheel as much as possible, and yeah, I've done it. I've got 13 hours on this thing. I'm trying to go for 14, but I don't know if I'm going to make it because I'm getting tired. and just off and on. I didn't do it all at once, obviously. But I'm just getting tired, and as you can see from this picture, I've taken it apart and I've looked at the hub area, and there's no stress cracking. There's nothing going on there. There's none of that. If you say, whoa, lost it. There's none of the, if you like bend a piece of plastic, it turns white underneath. There's none of that either. So yeah, it seems to be holding up like a champ, and to be quite honest, I'm a little bit surprised. I thought for sure I could rip one of those threaded inserts out or something and flip it around the other way, and you can see the inside view there. Again, no stress cracking anywhere, no stress to be found. And while we're looking at this, I was thinking, and I've said this before previously in this video, but I think I'm going to go ahead and do it. I'm going to get some 2-part epoxy, and all those little cavities you see around the threaded insert spots in the plastic, I'm going to fill those up with a 2-part epoxy, let it harden, and that's just for future wear and tear, so that, yeah, it hasn't cracked yet, but you know, there's no way I'm going to try to tell you guys that I think it will never crack, especially when I'm abusing it like this. So yeah, I just thought it would be a good idea to put 2-part epoxy in. But if I was running this at normal rates, in a less powerful motor, maybe I wouldn't even bother with it, you know, just leave it alone. Or maybe I just keep checking it, and first sign of a crack, I would go ahead and do it then. But I might just go ahead and do it because I just happen to have some on hand, and what the heck. Anyway, back to the durability. Yeah, I can't say it's broken, and yep, as you see, it's just doing a good job. And again, I'm pretty surprised at that. I thought for sure that we would be able to put a hurting on this wheel, but you know, obviously, you know, it wasn't designed for this kind of abuse. But it's holding up. It's holding its own. So yeah, hats off. I mean, I can't really dog it for that because it's really done the job here. Right. So enough of this driving. What we'll do next is get to the final thoughts, and I'll see you over there. Final thoughts on the Sim Racing Machine's USB conversion kit for the Fanatec Mclaren GT3 wheel. Now, I really like the look and feel of this wheel since I first got it. For me, the 300mm grip spacing is spot on for a comfortable grip. And the grips themselves are reasonably comfortable and seem to be holding up to the rigors of use so far. But I will be experimenting with grip mods to try and get it dialed on into my individual needs. As you know, I use direct drive wheel systems when I'm not reviewing a non-direct drive wheel system. And being able to use the Mclaren wheel on my direct drive systems was high on my to-do list. And I was very pleased to see Simon develop a USB conversion kit so quickly. And I bought one as soon as I had a review slot open. And I'm glad I did. The design and quality of the parts used, this is all top flight stuff that actually we've come to expect when buying products from Sim Racing Machines. Fitment to the Mclaren wheel was spot on without any dramas. Now, the process is a little bit involved, but not difficult at all. If you take your time, I think that, well, most folks won't have any issues at all doing the conversion. The firmware on the Teensy board does a good job of letting us use the features of this wheel. Aside from not being able to use the right side top rotary functions, can be assigned to, well, just about everything else. And the clutch bite point function works just as well as the Fanatec firmware does, with the only caveat being we don't get to see the percentage numbers in the OLED screen. Now, I did have some concerns about whether or not the Mclaren wheel would be able to withstand high torque forces that some direct drive wheel systems are capable of delivering. And I have to admit, some of the concern still lingers, as this wheel was never designed for this type of use, obviously. But after around 13 hours of running the wheel using a motor that delivers 13 Newton meter of holding torque and 26 Newton meter of peak torque, the hub is showing no signs of fatigue. And I have to admit, I'm a bit surprised by this. And to be honest, I thought I would have to find a way to reinforce the hub area, which I might do that anyway in the future. Again, hats off to Simon at Sim Racing Machines for getting this conversion out there, so those of us who want to can use the Mclaren GT3 wheel on our direct drive systems. I'm Barry Rowland, and thanks again for watching the Sim Racing Garage channel. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button and support the SRG by visiting our website at simracinggarage.com.